McDonald's golden grill.
It's got real pineapple.
With creamy tartar sauce, the Whaler is so big, so tempting.
Yumbo is still a hot ham and American cheese sandwich.
The 1960s were a time of wild experimentation. It was the decade of moon landings, lava lamps, and peace signs, but also the era when food companies let their imaginations run absolutely bonkers in the kitchen. We're talking about neon-colored meat, ham in a can with pineapple frosting, fish-shaped gelatin molds, and desserts that were technically edible, but only if you had a taste bud of steel. Join us as we delve into 25 of the strangest, boldest, and most baffling food innovations from the 1960s that crashed and burned spectacularly. In 1968, Jell-O went wild, literally. The brand introduced a trio of wild flavors, hoping to jazz up gelatin with bold, fruit-forward punch.
Any time, any season, for any rhyme or any reason. It's the dreamy with creamy, soft to chew, good for you, brightful, delightful, jiggly, wiggly.
Wild Cherry Jell-O was the standout. Tangier than its regular cherry cousin, with a sweet-sour zing that promised something different at every wobbly bite. It was the kind of Jell-O you'd expect to see at a groovy dinner party, next to fondue pots and avocado green decor, but it didn't stick around. Despite its flavorful twist, Wild Cherry couldn't hold its ground in the Jell-O lineup. Fans today are told to make do with Black Cherry, but that version brings a heavier, darker note, less wild, more funeral punch. Whether it was too niche, too tart, or just a victim of changing palates, Wild Cherry Jell-O faded out quietly. Speaking of quiet exits, another 1960s favorite made a splash with a towering bun and Midwest bravado. Before the Big Mac became a fast food icon, the Big Barney was already flipping double-deckers with special sauce and swagger.
We have fresh ideas at Red Barn.
I'm having a fish fillet just for the hell of it.
Born around 1961 under the red roof of Ohio-based Red Barn, the Big Barney had all the right ingredients: twin beef patties, American cheese, shredded lettuce, and a triple bun, stacked with ambition. It beat McDonald's to the punch by 5 years, but what it didn't beat was the brutal reality of franchise costs. Red Barn's barn-shaped restaurants were charming but expensive to maintain. As cookie-cutter fast food architecture took over, the brand couldn't keep up. By the 80s, the Big Barney became the Farm Boy under a new name and dwindling locations. The final Red Barn shut down in 2020, taking Big Barney with it. But what happens when a burger chain dares to go bunless and beefless? Long before fast food chains battled over chicken sandwiches, Burger King took a weird gamble with hot ham and cheese. Enter the Yumbo, a 1968 offering that wrapped lean ham and melted American cheese inside a warm, soft roll.
Just like when it debuted in 1968, the Yumbo is still a hot ham and American cheese sandwich, only this time it has lettuce and mayo. And instead of a round bun, it's on a long bun.
It came in a clamshell-style foam container that kept it toasty, long before McDonald's tried anything similar with the McDLT. The Yumbo wasn't flashy, but it gained a quiet following among those who wanted a break from burgers. Still, it didn't mesh with Burger King's growing grill-first identity. By 1970s, it was quietly cut from the menu. A short-lived 2014 comeback tried to modernize it with lettuce and mayo on a hoagie roll, but fans of the original weren't impressed. You can't reheat nostalgia. Of all the meatless meals ever attempted, McDonald's Hula Burger might be the most misguided.
McDonald's golden grill.
It's got real pineapple.
Ray Kroc cooked it up as a Lent-friendly option for Catholic customers who skipped meat on Fridays. The plan? Swap out beef for a grilled pineapple slice topped with cheese on a plain bun. Tropical? Maybe. Tasty? Not quite. Customers overwhelmingly preferred the Filet-O-Fish, created by a devout Catholic franchisee who knew what his audience actually wanted, something that didn't taste like dessert gone wrong. The Hula Burger vanished almost instantly, proving you can't force fruit into fast food just because it's Lent. After watching the Filet-O-Fish dominate the Catholic Friday market, Burger King threw its own net into the seafood game. The Whaler debuted in the late 60s with a crispy fish patty, a splash of tartar sauce, and shredded lettuce all nestled in a sesame seed bun.
With creamy tartar sauce, the Whaler is so big, so tempting, so... The Whaler doesn't get swallowed up by the bun.
It was a respectable sandwich, if a little forgettable. Unlike its flame-grilled siblings, the Whaler never got much love in the spotlight. Maybe it was the bland name, or maybe it just lacked the flavor punch customers expected from the King. While it had brief comebacks under new names, nothing stuck. Eventually, the Whaler got swallowed by the tide of limited-time offers and seasonal menu rotations. It never quite found its sea legs. The 1960s were obsessed with casseroles, and hamburger pie was a top-tier example of the trend. Budget-friendly, one dish, and perfect for busy families, it took everything Americans loved about a cheeseburger and mashed it into a pie dish. You'd layer seasoned ground beef, canned soup, sometimes mashed potatoes, and bake the whole thing like it was Grandma's secret weapon. And for a while, it was beloved. But over time, the novelty wore off. People realized you could just eat a burger, or a real pie. Hamburger pie ended up as a relic of a time when convenience ruled and flavor came second. Still, casseroles weren't done with us yet, not even close. Cheap, cheerful, and controversial. This casserole was Depression-era logic baked into a 60s dish. You'd take elbow macaroni, throw in ground beef, or sausage if you were feeling wild, and mix it with canned tomatoes. Sprinkle on cheese, bake, and serve. It was endlessly modifiable and surprisingly loved, unless you hated the texture, or tomatoes, or both. For some, it was comfort food. For others, it was a tomato-sogged nightmare. But in a world where meals had to stretch, this one earned its keep, for a while. Then came the casseroles with better balance, less acidity, and no risk of tomato backlash. Back in the early 60s, Hardee's wasn't selling curly fries and fried chicken. It was the house that the Husky built. This thick, charbroiled burger was Hardee's pride and joy. Home of the Husky signs hung proudly outside locations across the South and Midwest. With its smoky flavor and hefty size, it helped catapult the chain into the national spotlight. For decades, it was the go-to burger, until bigger, flashier burgers crowded it out in the late 80s and early 90s. The Husky quietly slipped off the menu, leaving longtime fans scratching their heads and clinging to memories of simpler, grill-kissed times. Also known, less affectionately, as SOS.
But to give you a quick idea, it cost me $5.13 to make this meal for four, so that's...
Chipped beef on toast was a Depression-era invention that clung on stubbornly into the 1960s. It was made by soaking thin strips of dried beef in a creamy white sauce, then ladling it over toast. The flavor? Salty. The texture? Soggy. But in tough times, it was better than going hungry. Military mess halls adopted it as a cheap and easy breakfast. The dried beef came from unwanted cuts, tough and stringy unless slow-cooked into submission. Paired with stale bread, it was far from elegant. But it was warm, filling, and dependable. For many veterans and working-class families, it was part of daily life. With a name that sounds like a tongue twister, Slumgullion Stew was the ultimate clean-out-the-fridge meal. It wasn't born in a chef's kitchen. It came from necessity. Tossed together ground beef, macaroni, canned corn, kidney beans, tomatoes, and anything else that hadn't expired, and you had yourself a dinner. No rules, no measurements, just whatever worked. By the 1960s, as suburban living exploded and grocery bills tightened, Slumgullion became a staple for families juggling budgets and hungry mouths. It wasn't pretty, but it was surprisingly tasty, like chili meets hamburger helper. It also had a sense of community baked in. Every household had its own version. Slumgullion was less of a recipe and more of a survival tactic in a saucepan. Before frozen waffles and toaster strudels ruled breakfast, there were potato pancakes, crispy, starchy, and born from frugality. Deeply rooted in Jewish cuisine, they were especially popular during Hanukkah but found broader American appeal during the Great Depression and post-war recovery. Why? Potatoes were cheap, filling, and available everywhere. Grated, seasoned, and fried until golden, these pancakes could stretch a meal or serve as a meatless main. By the 1960s, they had crossed over from cultural staple to general comfort food, embraced by diners and home kitchens alike. You'd find them topped with sour cream, applesauce, or even leftover gravy. While they never vanished, they've become overshadowed by flashier breakfast trends. On the flip side, the next dish was a total disaster. You read that right. Beef fudge. In 1967, the Poll at Hostess Cookbook offered up this fever dream courtesy of one brave, or possibly vengeful, Mrs. Florence E. Weist. Imagine a tray of rich, glossy chocolate fudge. Now, add bits of ground beef or pot roast. Supposedly, the idea was to balance sweet and savory. In reality, it was a dense, confusing mess. The texture clashed, the flavor confused the senses, and the concept haunted dessert tables for decades. Even the most daring retro recipe lovers steer clear. Some foods fail quietly. Beef fudge failed loudly with a meaty thud. And just when you think dessert couldn't get more disturbing, here comes dinner with a syrupy surprise. It was 1966, and Caro syrup wanted more than a place in your pecan pie. In a bold ad in Ladies' Home Journal, they proposed a main course: pasta in a sauce made with bacon, and a full cup of corn syrup. But wait, it gets better. The recipe called for whole hot dogs lined up on top like edible fence posts. Dubbed the Wineroni Casserole, it was sticky, salty, and weirdly sweet. It may have looked orderly on the outside, but inside? Chaos. The bacon helped, but not enough to justify the sugary sludge it floated in. Some dishes are bad because of poor execution. This one was doomed from the concept. This wasn't your grandma's rice casserole. It was something far more sinister. Straight out of Miss Fluffy's rice cookbook, deviled rice looked like a science experiment gone rogue. The ingredients: cooked rice, green peppers, onions, sour cream, Worcestershire sauce, mustard, pimentos, and currant jelly. The result? A swampy, gelatinous mash that resembled a 1960s movie monster more than dinner. Retro food ghoul described it as relationship ending. And they weren't wrong. It wasn't healthy, it wasn't tasty, and it definitely wasn't deviled in any redeemable way. In the 60s, goulash was the hero of tired parents and hungry kids, known by many names: American chop suey, slumgullion, or just that pasta mess with beef. It was quick, filling, and didn't ask much of you. Elbow macaroni, ground beef, diced tomatoes, and maybe some onions or bell peppers. It was the kind of dish you made in one pot, dumped on plates, and still had leftovers. But somewhere along the way, it got repetitive. Too much tomato, too little spice, and a rubbery noodle problem no amount of paprika could fix. It slowly slid off dinner tables, replaced by frozen lasagna and box meals with snappier branding. Still, for one shining moment, American goulash fed a generation that just needed dinner done fast. There's retro, and then there's regret. In the 1960s, Good Housekeeping proudly showcased mayo-infused gelatin salads that somehow passed as food. These weren't your average Jell-O molds. Inside the trembling dome were shrimp, macaroni, cauliflower, and parsley, all suspended in sweetened gelatin. And if that wasn't stomach-turning enough, mayonnaise was added not just as a binder, but as a decorative topping. The result looked like a jellyfish had exploded at a salad bar. Hellmann's was the main culprit, pushing these creations through ad-driven recipes. Other brands jumped in too, spawning even worse versions like the notorious Kling-a-Ling salad. Somewhere between art project and chemical spill, these salads were meant to impress. Unfortunately, they often did, just for the wrong reasons. They've since earned a permanent spot in the museum of just because you can doesn't mean you should. If you've ever had a meringue pie, you probably expected lemon or maybe a creamy coconut. What you didn't expect was fish. In one of the most puzzling experiments of the 1960s, savory pies stuffed with white fish were crowned with fluffy meringue and baked like dessert. Some versions added bacon, tomato, egg, or cheese to mask the aquatic origins, but the meringue always gave it away. A newspaper recipe even pitched it as a balanced breakfast pie. Balanced, maybe, but only if your idea of balance is sweet egg foam clashing with salty seafood. The texture alone was enough to send forks flying. Fish meringue pies were supposed to be elegant. What they ended up being was unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. Some dishes just scream, "We ran out of groceries." Hot dog casserole was one such budget-friendly brainchild. A staple in the 1960s, it combined sliced hot dogs with elbow macaroni, gooey cheddar cheese, and often canned vegetables, all tossed together and baked until it became one melted, meaty mound. It was frugal, filling, and just strange enough to catch on. Families loved it for its versatility and price, especially in areas where fresh ingredients weren't easy to come by. But despite its practicality, the dish walked a fine line between comfort food and culinary chaos. For many, it was a hot dog's final form, not grilled, not on a bun, but entombed in pasta and cheese. If you've ever wondered what a backyard barbecue and a school lunch tray would taste like combined, this was it. Chili Mac rose out of necessity and frugality and somehow became beloved by millions. During the mid-20th century, families were looking for meals that were cheap, filling, and adaptable. Enter Chili Mac, an effortless fusion of two pantry staples, elbow macaroni and chili. The macaroni provided bulk, the chili brought bold flavor, and together they created a dish that satisfied without draining wallets. It became a regular on dinner tables, especially in working-class homes. Ground beef, beans, tomato sauce, and spices were all cheap to come by, and macaroni stretched it further. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't need to be. Chili Mac could feed a family of 5 with leftovers to spare. Though it's no longer a trend, it still lingers in lunchrooms, potlucks, and nostalgic cravings, because nothing says American ingenuity like comfort food in a single pot. Before they were immortalized in pop culture, Beanie Weenies were just a quick fix for time-starved parents. This 1960s concoction combined baked beans, sliced hot dogs, and sometimes ground beef into one protein-packed plate. It was fast, easy, and kid-approved, which made it perfect for school mornings or last-minute dinners. The canned versions exploded in popularity thanks to companies like Van Camp's and Hormel, and soon, Beanie Weenies were everywhere, from military mess halls to family camping trips. They weren't gourmet, but they were dependable, shelf-stable, and oddly satisfying. The name may have sounded like a cartoon character, but the dish was serious about convenience. If you grew up in post-war America, there's a good chance this was in your lunchbox, or haunting your memories. Either way, Beanie Weenies earned their spot as a weirdly enduring comfort food. A wartime hero turned peacetime staple, corned beef hash was a pantry MVP throughout the 20th century. With its roots in Irish cuisine, the dish gained massive traction in the U.S. during the Great Depression and World War II when rationing made canned goods essential. Corned beef, potatoes, and onions were all cheap, filling, and easy to cook in bulk, perfect for feeding large families on a tight budget. By the 1960s, brands like Hormel and Libby's made sure you could buy hash by the can, heat it up in minutes, and call it dinner. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest food. Mashed into patties or spooned straight from the skillet, it carried a salty, savory punch that got the job done. Even today, you'll find it in diners across America, quietly clinging to its long legacy. Cabbage rolls may have arrived on American shores as a hearty old-world import, but by the 1960s they were a fixture of U.S. dinner tables, especially in immigrant communities. Each roll was a small, leafy package of meat, rice or buckwheat, and the occasional surprise like mushrooms or dried fruit. Boiled or baked, they served as a frugal filling dish during wartime and the lean years that followed. But for many kids growing up in mid-century suburbs, they were a mealtime horror. Soggy greens wrapped around mystery meat. Cabbage rolls had the unfortunate fate of looking too healthy and tasting too bland, unless doused in sauce or heavily spiced. Still, for the families that loved them, they were comfort food with cultural pride. For everyone else, they were the thing you tried to trade away in your lunchbox. Jambalaya wasn't just dinner, it was heritage in a pot. A fusion of Creole and Cajun traditions, the dish blended French, Spanish, and African influences and simmered its way into 1960s Southern kitchens. Born in Louisiana, it became a one-pot favorite across the country, especially where rice was abundant and dinner had to feed many. Jambalaya typically includes sausage, chicken, or shrimp, paired with tomatoes, peppers, onions, and long-grain rice. It was spicy, hearty, and deeply tied to family recipes passed down through generations. The brilliance was in its flexibility. You could stretch it for a crowd or turn it gourmet. As Southern food spread, jambalaya tagged along, proving that food born from struggle and diversity could become a staple. It may have started as regional fare, but by the 60s, this rice-based powerhouse had claimed its seat at the national table. Pimento cheese sandwiches were the South's answer to both comfort and convenience. Creamy, sharp cheddar mixed with diced red pimentos became the heart of a spread that graced white bread across generations. Some added garlic, cayenne, or jalapenos. Others spiked it with Worcestershire sauce for depth. No matter how it was made, it was affordable, filling, and unforgettable. This cheesy concoction popped up at school lunches, family reunions, and Southern picnics alike. In the 1960s, when simple prep-free meals were prized, the pimento cheese sandwich hit all the marks. You didn't need fancy ingredients, just some pantry staples and a fridge. Grocery stores carried tubs of the stuff, but many still swore by their grandma's homemade version. It wasn't flashy, but it had soul, and in the South, that's what mattered. Pickle roll-ups may sound quirky today, but in the post-war cocktail era, they were party royalty. This bite-sized snack featured dill pickles wrapped in cream cheese and deli meat, often corned beef or ham. Rolled, sliced, and served cold, they were salty, tangy, and dangerously easy to pop by the dozen. In the 1960s, potlucks and cocktail parties were booming, and hostesses needed finger foods that required minimal prep but packed bold flavor. Pickle roll-ups fit that bill perfectly. They became a staple of social gatherings, both casual and classy, and often competed for top honors on snack trays alongside deviled eggs and stuffed olives. Their appearance may have been divisive, but their flavor wasn't. With crunchy pickles and creamy centers, they won over guests one bite at a time. Love them or not, they were hard to forget, and harder to stop eating.